Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, councillors, members of staff, officers. Thank you for being here at the Overview and Scrutiny Committee summary, what's read out summary agenda, like some sort of numpty, meeting for the 9th of January 2024. Just getting used to saying 2024. I've written 2023 on my board at school several times already, so I'm corrected a lot by 8-year-olds in that respect. Can I start with remind everybody that this is a public meeting and is being live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. Item 1, declarations of interest, which I think we have some. Councillor Ward.
Thank you. Yes, I'd like to declare a non-registered interest in item 16 on the grounds that I've had previous involvement with a particular person, and therefore there's information I know that's not included in the report. So for that reason, I can look at the report in isolation, but I would probably have to say that I would abstain from voting.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, the Councillor Douglas. I know I was about to say call you Councillor Lacey, but yeah.
I'm also declaring an interest, non-pecuniary, in item 16. I will be predetermined in that discussion.
Thank you. And hello.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, just for the final item, need to declare that I am a director of Norfolk Environmental Credits, which may benefit from the DLUC funding.
Thank you. Agenda item 2, apologies for absence and any substitutes. We've had any apologies for absence?
No apologies received, Chairman.
Hello.
Sorry, Chair, I probably should also declare an interest as I'm a director on nutrients on NEC as well, for the same reason as the director.
Thank you. Agenda item 3, minutes of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting held 28th of November 2023. Do we have any concerns, worries or issues we want to raise around those minutes? Wonderful, I'll take that as read then that we're happy with them. Item number 4, Chairman's announcements. I did meet in just before Christmas to discuss some of the topic forms that have come in regarding future items. We've put on that there should be a regular review and feedback in relation to Vice Chairman's concerns around the Food Innovation Hub, if that's the right name. Yes, but that item will come it's now been put on the work programme to look into its work and to understand the work that it does. So hopefully that's one item that will be coming forward relatively soon, although I believe there are issues and items that may be pertaining to that in today's minutes as well. So I knew you'd be happy. I'll just say that the layout for the room is, of course, today just out of that's the way it was, and we are looking at possibly having future meetings in a more collegiate way, but perhaps in the other room where we can be a little bit more talking to each other rather than looking at people's backs, which is I know that it's not perfect. I mean, it's fine for me, but it's not very good for you today. So it's not a decision that's been made to do this. And also the nature of this time of year and certain reports and issues and the delay over Christmas has been the reason why there are certain amendments or changes to some of the recommendations that come to everybody as late as each other. It's not been thrown at anybody or done as in a way to mislead or to put anybody on the wrong track with anything that's come forward today, but we're all in the same boat, and I know the staff are doing the very best they can to make sure that we have all the right information in front of us, so don't see any hidden motive, anything that's come to you late. Do you wish to say anything, Vice Chairman?
No, actually not at this point.
No? Okay, I just thought I'd give you the chance. I know it's not on the agenda as such, but I thought I'd give you the chance. Public speaking. Do we have any public speaking?
No, Chairman.
No, thank you. Okay, get to the Cabinet report. Agenda item 7, the Treasury Management Quarter 2 report. which is going to be done with Rodney, and Georgina is there to offer some assistance. I know that Georgina is new to this, so she's or new to this element of the job, so she's here to learn from Rodney about how it looks to be at ONS. Apparently, Rodney's already told me she will take the difficult questions.
Thank you very much, Chair. So, as you'll be aware, the Council agrees a Treasury Management Strategy each year, and it's a requirement that we bring back to members at least once a year an update report on the progress with the Treasury Management. So very much this is this update report, the half-year report, so reporting the position on the Treasury Management as at the end of September. As I say, there's only really 2 points to really note on this. First of all, the investment level. We had £38 million worth of investments at the end of September, and our interest earnings on that have far exceeded our expected budget. So the budget for the year for interest estimates was just over £1 million. We're expecting at the end of the year to get £1.7 million, and that is essentially because we've had more cash balances than we were originally expecting, and of course interest rates have risen significantly since the budget was set. There's been no need to borrow so far this year as a council, and indeed there's no intention to borrow as a council. We are a sort of an authority that has investments in the bank as opposed to the need to borrow. And indeed, we set our indicators for our treasury management policies, and there's been no breaches of our treasury management policies to report. And that's all I need to add on that report, and on for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure somebody wants to ask you something, Rodney, so I'll put it out to the meeting. Anybody like to ask anything? Oh, Councillor Jane Simon.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just, there was a underspending, or there was a shortfall in the budget, the overall budget for the year of 575,000, and you've just said that the will be £640,000 more than we thought in investment income. So do those two now cancel each other out, and there's no need for council tax increases or anything?
Thank you. Yes, you're absolutely right. As it was reported in the Q2 report, we had that pressure on running the cost of our services overspend by over the £500,000. And as you say, that's offset by this expected interest element coming in to actually balance it off. So we've got an overspend on cost of running our services, offset by extra income for our investment income. So overall, at the moment, we're expecting the council this year to have a slight surplus on its budgets for the year. Obviously, that doesn't mean anything for next year. So we're going to have to look at what we need to set next year's budgets, and that will also be coming to the February Cabinet meetings to consider what we need to set next year's budgets.
Can I just ask, obviously, interest rates are historically high for relatively to the last 15 years or so. We're expecting that to dip this year, interest rates. So would we be expecting less income next year, or will we have built up any more reserves on that, on those assets to then offset the, so there's a greater amount of money, so therefore, even though it's lower rate of interest, we've got more money to earn interest on?
There's sort of a double answer to this. When we set the budgets for this year, we're expecting interest rates to be about 2%. So actually, for next year, we're still expecting them to be more than when we set this year's budgets. But indeed, what we're expecting in next year at 4% or so is less than what we're currently earning. So yes, it's going to be more than we budgeted this year, but it's still less than we're currently earning, if that makes sense.
Sorry, one more question, Rodney. The link asset managers who give advice, those the estimates they give go back from September 23, and they look now to be significantly out of line with what the market's expecting. We are expecting no more increases in bank rates, and they are saying that there will be further increases. So do they get updated regularly?
yes, these were the figures as at the end of September, which is why we put them in this report. But we do get, I think it's monthly updates from Link, so we keep an eye on them on a monthly basis.
Okay, with awareness of the length of the agenda today, and I think we've got no great enthusiasm to ask you many more questions, and you are up again, Rodney. Can I move to the recommendations, which we'll take together? The Cabinet is recommended to take the recommended to do what it says in option 1 and 2, and I'll be brief by saying just what it says in what it says in points 1 and 2. All those in favour of the recommendations? Thank you very much. That seems to be carried by everybody. Thank you very much, Rodney. We'll now move on to Rodney, to agenda item 8, changes to earmark reserves. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. So, as members may recall, when we considered the medium-term financial position by the Cabinet in October, there was an agreement that we needed to review our capital programme and potentially look at whether we could reduce the call on our general fund reserves. So this report is very much part of that overall strategy to look at actually how do we fund our capital programme going forward. And one of our options is to use some of our existing earmarked reserves that aren't being used for capital and see if they can be diverted to help fund the capital programme. So this report has very much looked at every single earmarked reserve we've got and said, actually, is it still being used, or could we actually reallocate that reserve money? And very much by doing this analysis, we've given you all the information about all the reserves, what they're used for. We believe that it's possible to close the Economic Success Fund Reserve, close the Housing Assistance Policy Reserve, and close the Neighbourhood Plans Reserve, and also to reduce the Compulsory Purchase Order Reserve slightly. And by doing so, that would free up £1 million worth of existing reserves in order to help fund the capital programme. So very much this report is setting out the reason for us being able to close these reserves and suggesting this money is then set aside to help fund the capital programme. Pause for questions.
Martin.
Thank you. The reserve I was looking at was the compulsory purchase order reserve. I know that both Fran and I, when we worked for setting it originally, looked at the value. I was quite robustly gone into. And I think a period about 18 months ago, there were actually 3 potential CPOs. I appreciate that obviously it takes time for the CPOs to come forward and get involved. And again, we've got a CPO in later papers. So I would still question whether the reduction by 250,000 of that reserve is the right thing to do.
It's an absolute valid question. Very much the idea that £650,000, there would have been sufficient in there to potentially have 2 going at the same time. This would very much restrict us more to only having 1 potentially going at the same time. However, on the other side of that, what we are tending to look at is if we're going to do a CPO, we'd try and turn it around quickly, as in you would buy the property and then sell it immediately, quite quickly by auction. And therefore, the likelihood of 2 running concurrently is actually probably quite small, when you may well be looking at being able to do from the purchase to sale within a sort of 6-8 week window. So it's a judgment call whether you want to keep that flexibility to be able to do 2 CPOs at the same time, or indeed whether 1 is sufficient.
Fran.
Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, so following on from that, as Martin said, the idea was that we would be ready in case that happened. And I know you say the likelihood is low. I totally get that. But what if that did happen? If we reduced this to 400,000, what would happen financially if we were in that situation? Would we just say, well, we can only do 1, or would we be able to take money from elsewhere to fill that gap? I mean, I suppose that's the question, because we did, as Martin said, absolutely. We were very robust about this when we went through it before to actually sort of come to this decision. So to come full circle and actually take that £250,000 out it doesn't seem right to me. Thank you.
If we did get the situation where we want to do two at the same time, we would need to come back and ask for permission to use a reserve or something to cover that shortfall. I think to bear in mind is we don't have officer delegation to pursue CPOs, so we will be coming back to pursue CPOs anyway. So as there is tonight a CPO report, it doesn't mean that actually by reducing this, it would reduce our ability to move as and when we need to. It would just be that rather than just asking for permission to do CPO, we'd have to ask for CPO and the funding to carry that out.
So that wouldn't really slow down that process in any way other than just there being one additional recommendation, possibly at a meeting, that the council progresses in finding the moving the money or going ahead with the purchase from whichever fund that it states it would be in. Is that correct?
That's my understanding. I don't know. Yeah, and Mike is also responsible for CPOs. He's also in agreement.
For the purposes of the video, Mike was giving us a thumbs up. Feels like one of those police interviews where they say, for the purposes of the recording, the defendant waived his rights. Right. Jonathan.
Yeah, obviously, overall, these are quite small amounts, and I don't see there's too much of an issue with changing the funds, as it were. The Economic Success Fund, projects like the Choices Programme, which were very successful, I'd always hoped that there were going to be more of them. So obviously losing the money from that fund, which they would have been able to do more projects like the Choices Programme, is a bit of a concern. But also the neighbourhood plans, we want the neighbourhood plans done in our parishes because they obviously then get more SIL money. So I think to sort of like to lose a reserve that helps the parishes as well might be a bit of an issue. But overall, they're not big amounts, so I guess the money can be found from other places, so that's probably all right. Do you, obviously you're putting this proposal forward, but obviously do you know where this extra £1 million will be going on the capital programme? Has it been assigned to anything? Because I don't...
Sorry. I think take the points in terms of the Economic Success Fund. Yes, you're absolutely right. There have been a number of projects in the past being funded from that, but there are no active projects being funded from that. So again, if there was a programme to actually, or suggesting to bring forward some programmes, again, we would need to consider the funding of them going forward. With regard to the neighbourhood plans, removing this reserve is not going to affect the ability to deliver neighbourhood plans because we budget for the costs of neighbourhood plans in our budget every year. So actually there is provision for them to continue, and indeed I think the council still supports those going forward as quickly as possible. So this is just a historical reserve that's been set aside from historical money for this neighbourhood plans, but we will continue to do that. And then it was your third point, which, the capital. This is not intended to be used to fund new capital. This is intended to be used to fund the existing capital programme. Because as you may recall, within the existing capital programme, in order to fund that, we're not only calling on some of our earmarked reserves, we also need to call on our general fund reserve. So by putting more money aside, we'll be able to reduce that call on the general fund reserve.
So, without wanting to sound facetious, and I'm not trying to be political either, but they're actually going ahead towards capital fund to fund things that have been agreed by the council over previous administrations and previous years, which are still ongoing and require ongoing funding. Thank you. Right, anybody else like to ask anything else? Oh, Councillor Bullman. Sorry, people.
The problem I have with this paper is that there is a recommendation to liquidate, for want of a better word, each of these earmarked reserves, and yet this paper does not come with a rationale as to why those particular areas should be relinquished and put into a general coffers or bank. So I'm uncomfortable with this because essentially I don't understand why it's necessary particularly, and we haven't made any clear understanding yet as to what capital programs we used for funding this money. So there must have been a rationale in the first place to have these reserves earmarked. Has that rationale disappeared completely? Why have these been chosen? What is the rationale for these? And is there absolutely necessary to do it now? Can we not look at a particular capital programme and then decide we want to move reserves from a particular programme to fund that? I find this too generic, too lacking in explanation, and I feel uncomfortable with it, to be honest.
To start with, yes, when reserves were set up, there had already been a reason behind these, and a number of these reserves have been set up a number of years ago. It's just that actually, if you look at whether they're currently being used, there's no current usage of those reserves, which is why we've gone through each reserve on a case-by-case basis and said, what's the reserve for, is it being used? And this report sets out that rationale in order to say, well, these three reserves aren't actively being used, and therefore Cabinet will have the option to decide to re-earmark them for something else. With regard to the overall need to do this, I think I need to refer you back to the Cabinet report on the 10th of October, where we very much set out the Council's medium-term financial position, and indeed I think the portfolio holder for finance made some mention of this also at the recent council meeting, saying that it was his intention to try and review this in order to put some more money towards that capital programme. So I agree it's probably not detailed specifically in the report, but it is following on from previous reports on this matter.
Again, I think what we'll do, if I had a chance to comment on this, we'll move to the recommendations. The Cabinet to agree the following changes to earmark reserves, as stated there, to close the Economic Success Fund Reserve, close the Housing Assistance Policy Reserve, close the Neighbourhood Plans Front Runner Reserve, and reduce the Compulsory Purchase Order Reserve by 250,000, and transfer these balances to a new capital funding reserve to be used to fund the capital programme. Can I ask for all those votes in favour of the recommendations?
Seven, Chairman.
And all those against?
Seven, Chairman.
Which means my vote is cast.
Can we just ask, because the questions are around the compulsory purchase order, is it that particular element that they've got an issue with? Is it all? So maybe we do separate votes, I don't know.
Okay. Emma's just asked, is there a particular element, if you want them separated out, so you could get some sort of, we get some forward agreement on areas where there are agreement, always looking for some areas of agreement. Is there one of those areas that you would like to take a separate vote on? I'm just asking Councillor Wymark as opposition leader.
Okay, I think it's where the money's going. It's not clear. It's all very well saying it's going to be used to fund capital programme, but where within the capital programme? It would be really useful to know, you know, a bit more detail on that. And I understand it. Obviously, it must be difficult, probably for you to say, actually, Rodney, to be fair. But I think that's the difficulty, to be honest, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, well, obviously, Councillor Bullman, sorry, not Councillor Bullman, sorry, I'm so used to you wanting to speak. Sorry, Councillor Morrill.
No, again, I mean, I raised it in my questioning earlier, and that I really do feel uncomfortable with the reduction in the CPO reserve. Okay,
I mean, I'm happy to express your particular reserves when I report to Cabinet. Obviously, my vote counts as casting vote. It's unfortunate I have to use my casting vote. I know that one particular member of your group takes objection, not here today, to me using a casting vote, but that's the way the meetings work. So, but I can certainly express the concerns that you raised to Cabinet, and they will hear me. They may not react, but they will certainly hear what I have to say. Thank you. So, we now go on to agenda item 9, charging policy, and like a bad penny, Rodney, sorry, thank you, Rodney, if you could report on this.
Thank you very much. So it's good practice to have a charging policy. It just sets out the overall framework for how you approach setting fees and charges. It doesn't set individual fees and charges, it just provides that framework. And very much we're proposing three key principles as set out in paragraph 2.2 of the covering report and in more detail actually in the appendix. Very much the first principle is that fees and charges should cover the full cost of the service. So where there is a discretionary charge, so for instance something like the garden waste bins or pre-planning application advice, then you should be looking to charge the full cost of that service to the person benefit from that service. The second principle is very much actually, albeit we want to cover the full cost of the service, it is appropriate in certain circumstances to actually considering giving sort of pricing discounts for those people on low incomes. So for instance, the bulky waste service, there's a full charge, but there is a discounted charge as well if you're on a lower income. So again, that's trying to ingrain that principle that it's perfectly acceptable to do that. And the third principle is actually we should just consider where appropriate to try and get people to pay in advance for actually a service. This has a benefit of very much ensuring that we do get the income from the service and we don't spend a lot of time and effort having to chase money for the service. And indeed these works for things like the garden waste charges where people pay in advance for the service being provided, pre-application fees. So again, it's in line with what we currently do. But as I say, this doesn't set the individual fees and charges. There's still discretion to make these sort of appropriate when you consider individual fees and charges, but it sets the general thrust, the general idea of what the council will be doing when it sets its fees and charges. And with that, pause for questions.
Any questions for Rodney? All seems to make great sense as a principle, you know, sort of it's like a set of values, isn't it, around what the council believes should always happen in regards to overarching policy. So yeah, I'm happy and everyone else seems happy. Let's go straight to the recommendation to Cabinet to recommend to Council that the charging policy Appendix A is approved. All those in favour?
Yep. Unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, Rodney, for all your work. I think you're now free. You come back later on, sorry, don't you, for the exempt papers. But yeah, thank you, Rodney, for have a short break, a drink or something. We move to agenda item 10, the Greater Norwich 5-year infrastructure investment plan and annual growth programme. And we have Paul and Helen. Just Paul? Just Paul. Thank you. Sit next to Rodney, now everyone can see you.
Yes, good evening all. Good evening, Chairman. Most members will be aware that when we permit development, we charge what's called a community infrastructure levy, which is a per square foot charge on certain types of development when it gets built, essentially. That money is paid to us in order to fund infrastructure. When that money comes into us, we keep 5% of that as an administration fee. We pass on a neighbourhood share to parishes. That's either 15 or 25%, depending on whether there's a neighbourhood plan in place or not. The remainder is then pooled at the Greater Norwich level. And then annually, we receive a report that comes back to both this council, Norwich City Council and South Norfolk councils as the charging partners for the community infrastructure levy to decide how to invest that year on year. And that's the report that is ahead of you today. I won't say a huge amount in terms of how that mechanism works, but in terms of what is proposed to be funded this year, and you'll see this set out within section 4 of the report, we propose that investment is made in 3 specific projects. Firstly, the Aylsham Gym and Fitness Hub. This is essentially phase 3 of a project at Aylsham High School. It was preceded by the refurbishment of the pool there, and its use both for the school and for the wider community. The delivery of a 3G artificial grass pitch at the school, which is again used both by the school and used by the community. And this will be the 3rd phase, which will provide a 40-station gym, multi-use fitness studio, changing facilities, and provides, I suppose, the full remit of facilities that the high school wishes to provide. And again, would be used both by the school and would be provided to the wider community. There's a proposal to fund improvements at Eaton Park, which comprise the renovation of changing rooms, the installation of some green technologies, signage and cycle storage at Eaton Park itself. When I say green technologies, I mean as it relates to the buildings themselves. And then funding for an extension to Plumstead Road Library, obviously nearby here. That would be an extension to the building, which would provide a multi-use space, kitchen and disabled access toilet. And that would provide some scope for them to provide additional services. So they're the three specific projects that we're proposing that SIL funding goes towards this year. That totals just over 900,000, 928,000 of SIL for a total project fee of just over 2 million, or just under 2.2 million really. And that's all detailed in table 1 of your report. In addition to those three specific projects, it's also proposed that the County Council, for its Education Capital Programme, receives £2.5 million worth of funding. That's a fairly standard fee that's provided every year to support the delivery of improvements to schools. Whilst it's not a requirement anymore for them to identify which schools it should go to, it can go into support general borrowing. This year they have been able to identify that money will go directly towards the final expansion of Wyndham High, and that will support the growth that's occurred within that area. The other couple of points that it's worth noting, which are referred to in the 5-year infrastructure plan itself, although not necessarily a decision for this council, is that members who remember last year's report will recall that a new category of funding was established called the Match Funding Fund. That's essentially to provide seed funding for projects to go out and find other match funding, and it is proposed this year that £650,000 of that goes into a further development at the Nest, which is a facility that's received funding in the past. That decision was taken separately by the Greater Norwich Growth Board. The way that the match funding pool works is that should there be a proposal to increase the amount of money that is in that pot, and it is currently at 4 million, less than 650,000 earmarked here, and that would come back to individual councils to agree. And last year, councils agreed 4 million to go into that pot. Because there's still quite a substantial sum in there, it's not proposed that's topped up this year, so it is in the background report, and it's, I suppose that's why I refer to it, but it's not a decision before this council to make, because it is done under those delegated powers. Similarly, in the background 5-year infrastructure plan, members may have noted that there's a 4.5 million contribution proposed from the City Deal Borrowing Fund to help support the delivery of Long Stratton Bypass. Again, a little bit like the Match Fund, that's noted in the 5-year plan because it's supported by pooled SIL, but the decision to allocate that funding is made under delegated powers by the Greater Norwich Growth Board themselves. So that's again worth noting, but it's not a decision before this council at this point in time. That's substantively what is proposed within the 5-year infrastructure plan at this point. It is worth noting that in terms of the overall fund, it is recognised, and some of you may have seen this from the tables within the 5-year infrastructure plan itself, that we're expecting a little bit of a dip in income around community infrastructure levy over the next few years. And that is a consequence primarily of a slowdown because of the constraints of nutrient neutrality and the fact that's created a brake on development. It's also to some extent related to the fact that we're moving from one local plan to another. When you put a new local plan in place, it identifies a lot of sites for growth. They come forwards, you then replace it towards the end of that plan period. Those sites tend to dry up a little bit. That's very common. So that those two things combining, but primarily nutrient neutrality, will impact upon the fund over the next few years, and that will require some sort of careful management going forwards. The other two elements referred to in recommendations, which I'll just point to before I draw to a close, is in addition to those specific projects that I've pointed to, it is proposed that we include Aylsham Gym and Fitness Hub and the Nest in Broadland's capital programme. That is really just about how we manage the finances around SIL. Ultimately, that money will be recouped from the pooled SIL fund, but the practical management typically means, not always, that we pay to the delivery body, in this case the high school or the Community Sports Foundation, and recover it. There are circumstances in which an organisation is so large that they can have a direct relationship with the Greater Norwich team. Actually, with the Community Sports Foundation, that might well be how we move forwards, but both are included, I guess, on a precautionary basis. In addition to that, and this is the first year that this is perhaps seen, the Greater Norwich Projects team, who are a jointly funded team, sit at County Council but are jointly funded by the Greater Norwich partners, administer the SIL fund. Their role has grown over time, so now they simply don't manage the pooled SIL fund. They also manage the City Deals Loans Fund that we've referred to in the context of Long Stratton, and they indeed work as client-side project managers around a number of joint evidence studies. So some of you may be aware, we've recently completed the Greater Norwich Physical Activity and Sports Strategy. That was something they managed. We're currently in the process of preparing a green infrastructure strategy for Greater Norwich. All of those result in an increased complexity and scale of the function of that team. What is proposed this year is that there is a contribution from that pooled SIL pot, not the administration fee that we take, but the pooled SIL pot, to help support the functioning of that team. It's not uncommon to take money out of pooled SIL to support officer time that was absolutely necessary in order to deliver infrastructure, and indeed the effective management of that fund is seen to be critical to the delivery of infrastructure, because failures in management will result in there not being enough money to fund projects and all sorts of other things that you can draw your own conclusions on. So this year it is proposed that 100, or in the region of £115,000, is provided from that pooled SIL pot to support that increased function of the Greater Norwich Projects team. The reason that it's referred to as in the region is that some of the job roles that this funding will go to are in a process of review. I am assured that that money won't go too significantly up or too significantly down, but as you'll see in the recommendation, there is a delegation to the Director of Place in consultation with the leader to agree the final fee. So that provides us some security to ensure that that doesn't go too far beyond what is included within recommendations in this report. And very finally, you'll see under point 4 there is a recommendation that we agree a further variation or a deed of variation, further deed of variation to the partner drawdown and borrowing authorisations agreement. There was some amendments made last year which was connected to the establishment of the City Deals Loan Fund. It's been identified a further deed of variation is necessary in order to enable that to function. That's detailed in the appendix, and that is what the final recommendation covers. That's a fairly broad cant through, but of course happy to pause for any questions.
Thank you, Paul. A lot to digest there. Thank you. Has anybody got any questions or comments? I'll start with Councillor Laming, and then she just beat you by a fraction of a second. Then I'll go Fran, and then I'll go Jonathan. If that was the right order, was you put your hand up, wasn't it, Fran? Didn't we, Scott and Martin?
Yes, thank you. I don't have any problem with the recommendations, but I do have a comment to make that I am concerned that there are pressures on this system, really, so that I see as time goes on, more and more money is going to be spent on major infrastructure projects, such as, well, primarily new roads, leaving less and less money for smaller community infrastructure projects, which are actually highly beneficial to local communities. So in some ways, my question is, are we going to be looking for other forms of funding, other funding streams in the future? Because, yeah, there's going to be a lot of pressure on this. Thank you.
Yes, well, essentially, when we look at investing still, that's in the context of a document that's pulled together called the Greater Norwich Infrastructure Plan, which identifies all the infrastructure essentially that's needed to support growth across the area. It's fair to say that when you look at that list, the cost of that infrastructure far outstrips what you'll ever recoup in SIL. That itself drives a need to find external sources of funding. And actually, when we look at things like the Long Stratton Byports or the significant infrastructure programme that's been around the Transforming Cities Fund, which has funded a lot of the highways changes around the city, actually, whilst that's been supported by SIL and is being supported by SIL in the future, the vast bulk of that is coming from central government funding. So as we move forward, that's the way we're going to have to operate if we're going to deliver the infrastructure that's needed to support growth. Now, clearly, we're not going to know the details of all the funds that will be out there in the future, but I think we can be assured they will be available. And part of the work we do in partnership and with the Greater Norwich Projects team is about being able to agilely respond to those.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I'm very happy to support this, and as you know, I was at the Communities Housing and Planning panel, subbing for someone else. But the question I asked then, and I don't know if you've got the answer now, was around the Aylsham Gym and Fitness Hub, because obviously there's a big gap there. So I didn't know if there'd been any further information about whether or not, you know, Aylsham is sitting on huge pots of SIL money themselves as a town council, but the beneficiary of this ultimately will be the high school. And I'm taking it that the high school will be the beneficiary of any income from it too. So I didn't know if there'd been any progress there. That was my question, really. Thank you.
In terms of progress, no, I've not received any further clarity around any conversations that occurred at the town council level between the school and the town council. But as you rightly identify, a significant proportion of the funding is coming from elsewhere. And yes, the school will receive the income from this. I'm not expecting they're going to go out and all buy Lamborghinis. I suspect actually it's pretty difficult to fund this, and actually that's going to be ploughed back into the school and its operation. But no, I'm afraid I haven't had any further clarity on those points.
Yeah, sorry, mine was just a little bit of clarification. In the recommendations, obviously it says approves the 5-year infrastructure investment plan, and then recommendation 2 includes the Aylsham Gym, Fitness Hub and the Nest. But obviously in the first bit it says to approve the information set out, and then to me, I was just checking that that's not additional. That is the money I know you did explain that is the money that's mentioned in the report, not additional funds we'll be signing up for the projects.
Exactly so, Councillor. There's a rogue S in there. It should say include the Aylsham Gym and Fitness Hub and Nest in the Council's capital programme, but that's simply to overcome that financing mechanism.
Thank you, Paul. Great, and I think we discussed this before, but it's just going further. I know in 6.1 in paragraph 3 there it talks about the nutrient neutrality and the effects on NEC, and in table 1 it shows the decline of the balances. But it's more really just satisfaction around the numbers that are in there, because obviously from our council we've literally had one programme come through into NEC. I don't know of any others that have come through, but then again, we wouldn't be made aware of what they are. So it's really just a question of, I don't remember it being in the risks before, and I did mention that it should be, and that's obviously great that it's now appearing there.
Yes, thank you. So there were some comments made at Communities Housing Planning Policy Committee, one of those being that risk. And so yes, we've added in some text to try and reflect that conversation, the debate we had there. So hopefully the report is better as a result of that. if it's comfort around the forecasting that you're looking for, and I forget whether we discussed this previously at that committee, but what we've done when we forecast the SIL that's coming in is we've tried to look at when we expect development to come forwards on the basis of when the nutrient neutrality constraint will be overcome. Now that's not a perfect science, and you need to make some assumption about when things will be available, and credits from NEC will be part of that. I'm probably not the right person to talk about other schemes they're exploring. They're obviously to some extent a separate entity, and therefore I'm not party to everything that's going on through that. But what we've tried to take into account in terms of forecasting when housing will come forward is what the expectations of the developers are, and we've done that in conversation. We've looked at when we expect mitigation to be able to come forwards, and we've tried to marry those two together with some precautionary delays to housing. And indeed, in certain instances where we think developers have been overly optimistic, we've pushed their housing back further than they would themselves say in their programme. We then applied an additional sensitivity deduction to our forecasting on SIL. So I think it is a relatively cautious estimate. That said, it does require mitigation to come in place, and as and when we review this going forwards, if things haven't happened like we expected, then we'll need to re-review the forecast. But that is, I guess, at least part of the benefit that year on year we agree this programme, because we're not agreeing the next 5 years of spend, we're agreeing the immediate next year's spend. So hopefully that gives a degree of comfort.
Thank you. Speaking personally, have used in my job. We go to the Nest a lot, our school. It's a fantastic facility. Community Sports Foundation, I can't speak highly enough of. They're a fantastic organisation that do so much good work, employ some amazing individuals who do a lot of work with disabled groups and children and all sorts. I could eulogise about them for ages. And also the facility at Aylsham is fantastic. I know that the football club in my ward in Horsford use that to train at a lot of the youngsters over the winter months because the floodlights there. Again, brilliant facility. So these are things that I completely support. The funding is going towards. I'm speaking personally here, but at that point, we've taken all the questions. I'd like to move to the recommendations, and I'd like to take them all in block, because if not, I should be reading for the next half hour. All those in favour of the recommendations as stated?
It's unanimous.
Thank you very much for that really detailed report. Thank you. Agenda item 11. Approval and adoption of the conservation area appraisal for Halvergate and Tunstall Conservation Area. And with Chris. Hi.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. So as the Chair said, this is for the adoption of the conservation area appraisal for Halvergate and Tunstall. It's a duty of a local authority due to the Planning Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Act to, from time to time, review the conservation areas to make sure that they're up to date and to carry out an assessment of the area and to review the boundaries. In this case, there's no actual changes recommended to the boundary, so it's just the adoption of the appraisal that we're recommending. The authority has 20 areas, and we're going through a process of looking at all the areas. Quite a few of the conservation areas are very closely linked to the Broads Authority, and this is slightly unusual in that this particular appraisal is being carried out by the Broads Authority Heritage Officers rather than the officers at the authority. So they've basically gone through the process, which is advised by Historic England guidance notes to go through walking around the area, engaging with the local community through consultation, having a consultation event to assess the area, see if there are any boundary changes required. The conservation area appraisal was last carried out in 2007 when the conservation area was initially adopted. The appraisal basically goes through the historic development of the area, the character, things like local materials, local building types, spaces, important bits of landscape, everything very much geared towards assessing the heritage of the area. And also, importantly, it looks at the possible management and enhancement of the area, which is also a requirement of the Act. So it lists some recommendations in those respects. The appraiser has already been to the Communities Housing and Planning Policy Development Panel on the 13th of December, and they raised a couple of questions. Firstly, regarding why there's no Article 4 direction proposed. And generally, Article 4s are used in conservation areas in particular circumstances where they help to preserve the character. And these circumstances are things like groups of terrace houses, particularly fine areas of townscape, say like the Reef and Marketplace, those sort of areas where there's a very strong heritage and some extra withdrawal of permitted development rights is beneficial to preserving the area. But in this case, it's quite a varied character. There's quite a lot of newer buildings intermixed with the older ones, so it was felt that it wasn't considered appropriate in this case. There's also a question raised by at the consultation event about distinguishing between the Broads Authority and the Broadland District Council authority in terms of the local planning function, and to make this clearer, and that's what the Broads Authority have changed the appraisal to make that slightly clearer in terms of the different functions of the two authorities. There's also very clear maps where the local authority, planning authority boundaries are in the area. So you can see that clearly in the appraisal and the maps. So the recommendation, I should also say that it has actually already been to the Broads Authority Committee as well, and they've approved the appraisal. So the recommendation is for the approval and adoption of the conservation appraisal for Halfgate and Tunstall.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to say I need to declare an interest, as I completely forgot at the Communities Housing and Planning panel, that I'm actually a member of the Broads Authority. So just for transparency there, although I was not at the meeting in the 15th of September when it was adopted, but just for clarity there, and that's why I did forget the panel before to declare that. But I think it's a really good appraisal, and I'm happy to support it. Thank you.
So, I know we've got a couple of members who whose wards are getting out that way. Paul and Ellen, and they're about the nearest ones we've got here. I don't know if you've got any comments in particular, or just whether you're happy with things as they are, Eleanor.
Yes, thank you for the report. I don't have a question about the report, but and this is quite minor, but in the recommendation, it says that Cabinet and Council approve and adopt the report, but in the forward plan for Cabinet on page 206, it just says Cabinet make the decision. So is it Cabinet and Council who make the decision, or just Cabinet to approve the report?
I think in terms of adoption, normally, especially if there's boundary changes, it has to go to Council just to legally clarify that it's adopting.
Thank you.
I think we move to the recommendation. We can all read it ourselves, but all those in favour? Wonderful. It's unanimous. Thank you. Yeah, sorry. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks, Sharon. On to agenda item 12, the LGA Corporate Peer Challenge Progress Review, with Emma giving a report on this. Thank you, Emma.
Thank you, Chair. So members that were with us under the last term of office will remember the peer review visit that we had, which feels like an absolute lifetime ago now, and the recommendations that came out from that and how we were going to move that forward. As part of that, the LGA come back to do a repeat visit of where are we, where were we with the actions, from the recommendations, what does that progress look like, and anything else that they need to feed through. I will just remind members, because I know we had a lot of talk about this last time, the appendix that you've got in front of you, we cannot change. So that is written as it's written from the LGO. We can't change those words. They have been discussed with both leaders of the council and agreed as written. So we can have a discussion around it, but if it's about changing wording, unfortunately, I can't do that. So just taking you to page 228 of the report, which is within the appendix, you'll see there the peers that came back and then the officers and councillors that were spoken to as part of that peer review. And then section 3 of the report is a RAG status of all the recommendations that were raised last time round and where we are with those, with the majority of those being green and 2 stated as amber. There's a narrative underneath there around where we're at, where we need to move going forward. I won't read that out for you. You're all capable of reading that. But that shows where we are on our journey and actually how we've moved quite a lot of stuff forward and provides us some kind of thoughtful next steps and how we can take things further forward should we wish to. I will leave it there, Chair, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Do we have any questions? Fran.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, it was a couple of things. I noticed within the review, it was very clear that there was a need for some clarity about what was going to be expected from both councils around policies, etc. And we're talking about having meetings to clarify that. Obviously, some things would be absolutely sovereign, and therefore different, and other things would be the same. And so I wondered where we were going to go with that, if there was any progress on that. And also, there's a reference here to leaders meeting more regularly and actually discussing things, and that would be leaders for both councils as well, not just within this council, because currently, obviously, as leader, I have a leaders meeting every 3 months, which is, I'll say this, I don't think that's enough. But also between the two councils, we've had no meetings for all the leaders, and obviously if there was any progress on that, really. So if there's any clarity you could give, or when those discussions might be had, that would be useful. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem, Councillor Weimarks. In terms of the first point around policies, and probably more widely, is around kind of what's joint, what's common, and what is sovereign. And I think as well, having new members in, it's probably worth refreshing it, and for us as officers, worth refreshing our minds, kind of what we've got. So Sinead's been doing a piece of work for me in terms of just going around from policy to staff to system to actually get it kind of documented. What is joint? What is common, so there's things that are similar, and then what is absolutely sovereign, so that we can start to put all of that together and share that information for all members, so that we're all really clear exactly where we are with that. So that's work in progress, and as soon as we've got that finalised, we'll circulate that round. In terms of the leaders' meetings regularly, obviously we're 6 months into a brand new administration, so I think the peer review team recognise that we're on a journey as a council. So as you say, those group leader meetings have now been put in the diary. There have been one, I think maybe 2 meetings between both leaders of each council, and the idea is to kind of build that momentum on that over time. We don't want to push it, because otherwise we don't want to stray into the political space. We don't want to push it, but we want to make sure it works. And I think it will evolve and it will happen over time. I think it's just going to take us the time to get there. But there absolutely is the ambition from both council leaders to have those meetings more regularly, and then look to expand that out as we move forward.
Does anybody else have anything else they want to say? Peter.
Can we look at recommendation 5, and can we ask to what extent we have plans in place to streamline procedures and processes, because clearly that is going to be beneficial for our taxpayers. So what progress are we making? What are our plans to streamline processes? Where are we at, and when can we see some progress?
So this is exactly what I was talking to Councillor Weimark about. It's absolutely the review we're doing at the moment in terms of what is joint, what is common, and what is sovereign. And we know there are some things that will just absolutely say sovereign to each council, and rightfully so. They're sovereign councils. So it's about doing that bit of work first, and as I said, we'll then look at that and communicate that forward. I think in terms of kind of the really big ticket items, it's been really interesting looking at it. When you look at a systems perspective, the IT that all the team work on is joint and common across the board. Those efficiencies are there. Those efficiencies have been realised. It's now looking at things from a transformation perspective, but also from a business kind of process review. Is everything working efficiently in the way that it needs to? And again, the answer to that may be that we do more, even more joint, or actually, but we've got to recognise the area within which we work. So I think Councillor Bullman, the answer that I gave to Councillor Wymark absolutely interlinks into that, and those updates will come through as we work that through.
Thank you. I think we'll probably then move to the recommendation, which is simply to receive and endorse the Corporate Peer Challenge Progress Review Report. All those in favour of receiving and endorsing the Corporate Peer Challenge Report, raise your hands. Unanimous. Thank you very much. We move on to the never-ending agenda of... It's funny, we had a really short meeting, didn't we? Was it the last meeting? We seemed to be over in 35 minutes or something. So, agenda item 13, the Rural England Prosperity Fund Shared Equipment. And that's going to be led by Nina and Deborah. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry about that. Thank you very much, Chair. So I've got my colleague Deborah here who's going to assist me with this report today. So essentially we've brought this report back to you as a commitment that was made when we brought it originally back in November 2022 with the idea of doing some further research into a single piece of equipment for our Broadland Food Innovation Centre. So since then, we've commissioned a piece of work by the National Centre for Food Manufacturing, which is in the University of Lincoln. And they did a detailed piece of work for us, looking at which pieces of equipment might be best suited to our location in the guise of improving innovation for food businesses locally within Norfolk and Suffolk. This took longer than expected, and there are still gaps, so a line was drawn under that report, and it has been appended as Appendix 3, but some good findings were included in there, and the option that was alluded to was an extrusion line for the BFIC on the proviso that there was enough space for it, and based on the fact that it could be used for plant-based protein as well as meat, and there's a lot of meat being produced locally. With the success of leasing out our centre, another option was put in there as a freezer, a standalone freezer chiller outside the BFIC, so that was also included in there as another option if no space was left in the BFIC, which is currently the situation. We've got leases now for all of the units. So that said, we have some additional proposals for you to consider today in terms of different approaches that we could use based on the position that we find ourselves in and the success of the business, rural business builder. We are suggesting that some additional funding could be used for that. So all of the funding has been allocated, if not paid out to date. So there's an option to top that up with another £200,000. And another option for you to consider is to offset the allocation in the capital reserves for fitting out of the test kitchen as a what is it called? A creation kitchen, which is slightly different to the test kitchen we have in there. It's more about showcasing content for social media. So it's a slightly variation of what we have at the moment, which is good because it adds to the offer that we've got on the table. And some work has been done on how much that might cost to fit it out, which is about 50,000, and some designs have been included in the report for you to review. So those are the two additional options that we are proposing that are considered for today. I was going to leave it there for questions, but essentially our recommendations are for an allocation for the test kitchen of 50,000 to divert the rest of the funding up to 200,000 for eligible businesses, and where the grants would be in a similar vein to the first time round, which is a maximum of 25,000 and match funding has to be provided by the businesses. And then the third recommendation is for delegation for the Assistant Director to basically sign off contracts, agreements and additional proposals that are needed in order to deliver the schemes that are opted for. So I'll pause there for any questions.
Just ask Emma and Robin to clarify, because there's some different figures that you're reading out from what is actually in the recommendations. So can I just ask, perhaps between you, because you mentioned 200,000 a couple of times, but it says £25,000 in the recommendation.
So providing grants of up to 25,000 per business.
Right. Which is a total of 200,000.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. That perhaps needs to. Yes. Emma.
Make a suggestion on that one where you've got divert remaining funds. I would put in brackets.
Yeah, that
200,000,
yeah.
and then that will clear that off, Chair.
We have 250,000 that we're discussing today, and how that might be spent going forward.
Do we have any questions relating to this? I knew Peter would. Go on, Peter.
Phil would be disappointed, I'm sure, if I didn't make at least a comment. Given that we are going to be getting reports, or a report at least, on this project, I would have liked to have considered this particular item in that context, but clearly we're putting the cart before the horse, so I feel a bit disappointed about that. So I couldn't vote for it.
Eleanor.
Yes, thank you for the report. In paragraph 3.14, it says that grants have been well received with a total of 9 projects approved so far. I just wondered, I might have missed this, but have we seen a list of the 9 projects approved so far? Because it'd be quite interesting to see them. And I wondered how many of those relate to carbon reduction or environmental improvements?
Just to come back on that one, the report hasn't been received so far. At the end of this financial year, we've committed to bringing a report of everything that has been awarded funding so far. I don't have all the full details of those projects at this time, but we will bring them to Cabinet for you.
I think that's in March, isn't
it? It is in March, yeah.
Do we have any other questions or comments? Eleanor.
Yes, thank you for that reply. And also in paragraph 5.2, it mentions under possible other options, there could be possible installation of EV charging points and solar PVs in community locations, but there isn't any detail. I don't know if you had locations in mind, but it's quite hard to make a decision without a bit more detail on other options.
So within the funding, there is the opportunity to use the capital for either business support or community support. An option is improving community infrastructure for electric charging points. Norfolk County Council have secured large amounts of funding to deliver across the county, which includes Broadland. I don't know in detail all of their locations, and it could be that this funding could be used to top that up. But at this stage, we don't, because it's quite early on in the scheme. We don't know how much funding might be needed to top it up. But there is also we do also have the issue that this funding must be spent by March 2025 or we will lose it, whereas the county council funding that they've secured is separate to this.
Can I ask, this equipment you want to put in, is it going to be used by existing people in the units, or is it to encourage more people to come into the units?
It's both. It's both, most definitely. So it'll be available to both. It's all about improving and enhancing the food and drink cluster. So open to both.
Can I just plead my ignorance here and just ask, a content creation kitchen, could you explain that to me in layman's terms?
I can start. So this is new for me as well. So in the day of, in our current time of social media, it's really important for food and drink businesses to have a platform and a really beautiful location to film their food and talking about their food, which is what our kitchen would be. So a functional kitchen, but but very tastefully decorated for those types of purposes. Anything to add to that?
No, so within the designs it includes a media wall, so they will be able to use it appearing in a domestic kitchen, but using it as a commercial environment.
I actually assumed it was that, but didn't dare say because I thought I'm going to make myself look a right muppet, and now I look like the person who's wise after the event. But I'm pleased that part of my brain is at least working correctly. So, thank you. Does anybody else have anything else they want to ask or say relating to this? I think we'll move straight on to the recommendations. Are we happy to take them as a block together? People are nodding. That's generally good. So we'll take the recommendations as a block. All those in favour of the recommendations? And 13. All those against? 1. Thank you very much. I have to ask Claire to stop the live stream because I move that the press and public be excluded from the meeting for the remaining items of business because otherwise information which is exempt information by virtue of paragraph 3 of part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended by the Local Government Act